Welcome to Steel Yourselves. This is our first webinar of this kind, and I'm really excited about the guests we've got and to see how it goes. And why I'm excited is because it is something I haven't seen and we haven't done before. The essence of what we're going to try and do tonight is that Ilari and Fiona are going to try and make the best case they can for a position that they disagree with around testing. I think it's going to be really interesting to see two, can I call you titans of the testing industry? Two titans of the testing industry. Review their perspectives and think critically about positions that they don't think hold, and try and make the best case that they can to help themselves think through and help us think through why maybe we've got it wrong, or in which ways we might have it wrong. There are two topics up for grabs. Ilari is going to talk about test cases being critical for high quality testing. And Fiona is going to tell us why professional software development requires independent test teams. The format is this: we'll have Ilari first, 10 minutes making his case, 10 minutes for questions, and then 10 minutes to reflect on the experience, and that's going to include the prep, the delivery, and potentially the questions, maybe by challenging what he says. We might be able to get him to think again. Just a couple of slides about the AST. It's great to see you all here. Some of you are non-members. I just wanted to say it'd be great if you wanted to become a member. I'm not going to make a hard sell tonight, but I will say that we do have a pay what you can membership scheme to help to encourage inclusivity and diversity. And if that can help you to join, that would be, I would be really delighted. In August this year, we have our CAST conference. The lineup isn't available just yet, but it will be released very soon. You can find out more details there. The theme is hands-on. We're going to be trying to talk about and in workshops actually do real testing. And we also offer courses, the really acclaimed black box software testing courses. There are 3 foundations: test design and bug advocacy. And then if you get really into it, you can also become a BBST instructor. Okay, that's it. I said it wouldn't be a hard sell. Steel yourselves. I'm going to invite Ilari. Please tell us what you've learned.
All right, let's see if I can share my screen. So there we go. Hold on, almost there. All right, so I currently have a hardware problem with my screen, so it doesn't really work in presenter mode, so that you get a nice little screen. So I just have my PowerPoint open to present my case. So yes, my case is the test cases are critical for high quality testing. And maybe I'll introduce myself first. So my name is Ilari Henrik Aegerter. I'm a boss, I'm a manager, and I'm a consultant. So that should give you some indication that I actually know what I talk about, because as a boss, I'm always right. As a manager, I know how to organize my thoughts, and as a consultant, I know things better. So that's from my position of what it is. Anyway, let's see my position that I have. There is a test case that are critical for high quality testing. So first, it might make sense to define a little bit of what I actually mean by a test case. What I'm referring here is what a human, or what we call manual testing in the craft, is executing on the product manually. So I don't mean by test case something like a unit test or something like that. I mean that as a artifact that is stored somewhere, ideally in a test case management tool. And the test case, it consists of a title. There should be a test ID, giving a unique identifier for that. There should be some prerequisites that you require in order to execute the test case. Then some wording on the test setup and the environmental variables should be clearly defined in a test case as well. Then so that's the core of the test case, of course, are the numbered test steps that will guide the tester to execute the test case in the right order with the right inputs and all that. For every single step, there should also be an expected results, because if you don't have an explicit expectation on what actually you're testing, I would make the point that you're not really testing. So what do I mean by critical? By critical, I mean this is an element in any project or like a life cycle that if you leave that away, everything will fall to pieces. So it's a critical element of any testing project that you have test cases. And if you don't have them, that's what I mean by critical. So if you remove test cases, testing will actually collapse in a project. Then the last part, what do I mean by high quality testing? This is what I mean, what a professional software tester should acquire as a knowledge, so that they use test cases with step-by-step test cases, steps in the test case in order to execute all the testing. Now for my arguments, there are actually 7 main pillars of arguments. There might be more side arguments, but I thought I'll focus on the most important parts. So first of all, the test case are an explicit document which with controllable link to specification and requirements. Requirements and specification, of course, guide exactly what the product is going to be. And the test cases are a matching element between what is written in a specification and the requirement. And it is an explicit document that is traceable, where you can actually make the link between the specification and the requirements, which also gives you the possibility to see if you miss something or not. So that would be my first point. Then test cases, if you have, let's say, a set of 10,000 test cases, at any point in your project, you can monitor the progress of your project. It gives you a traceable artifact that helps you guiding the project. So you can, at any point, you can see what test cases have already been executed and what are still open, which will give you some indication on where you're standing in the project. Now, of course, because I'm a seasoned person, I know that there's not a one-to-one match of test cases, number being the exact number of progress in a product, but it will give you some hint and indication on the ballpark number you're handling. All right, then, so test case repository, avoid reinventing the wheel for the following iterations. Now, just imagine if you build a product and there are some following releases, and every single time you would have to restart your testing and kind of do all the thinking once more. So test case repositories are really helping you to avoid reinventing the wheel every single iteration or every single release you're going. So for the following iterations, you can start with the repository you already have and build on that. That is a very helpful part of having test cases as well. Now, there is a big problem in software testing that usually maintainability is truly a problem, especially in the building part. But because there is, as I see it in good test case repositories, there's always a good link between the test case that you have with the specification requirements, which are also ideally stored in the same tool framework that you're using to hold your test case. So there is a direct link between the specs and recs, and this will help you to lower your maintainability costs in the product. Now for the 5th point, so for junior testers, test cases offer a fast-track path into testing. Now, that to me is a very important point, because in our craft, there is no university degree in software testing. There is hardly any education available. And as a very junior person, how would you get into testing? This is very difficult. There is no degree you can do in software testing. So when you start testing test cases, because of their explicit step-by-step guidance, will help junior testers into getting into the craft. So by just executing the test cases, they get into the thinking work of the test designer who has set up the test cases. And by doing that, over time, the junior tester becomes more proficient in her job. So test case really it's a fast track. You can really delve into the profession and go from there. Now, also test cases, one of the difficulties in any test project is to evaluate the coverage of your testing. Now, because there is a direct link between the requirements document and the specifications, the test cases will give you guidance on how high your coverage is in your testing. So the more direct links there is between your specifications and your test cases. From that, you can derive how your test coverage is. So now, as a last point, I would like to make the point that there is this seminal, so I can show you this. This is the seminal 1994 comparative meta-study by J. Doe at Royal State University of Utopia, on test case being the pinnacle of best practices, offers the ultimate proof that what I was saying here was actually right. It is actually quite a thick study. I have it here, but it's worth reading. So with that, I actually close my argument, and I hope that my seniority and my chain of arguments have helped you understand that test cases are really critical for high quality testing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilari. So does anyone have questions? If you could raise your hand, then Zoom or queue questions for us. If you are happy to go on camera to ask your question, that would be great. If you prefer to just use voice, that's fine too. Or if you don't like either of those things, please do put your questions into chat and I will ask them on your behalf. Yes, Kartik.
Hey, hi, good morning.
Hi,
It's morning here. So yeah, I'm in Victoria, Canada. So the question that I have is, in an end-to-end test case, like a journey test case, where the test case is quite large and it has a number of steps, probably more than 25 or maybe 50 steps. So in such cases, is it worth the value? What value can we get out of linking all the requirement documents to this one particular end-to-end journey test case?
So if I understand it correctly, you're referring to test cases that have more than 25 steps, so like the rather long test cases, yes, where there is many references to many items in the requirements document. Is that what you're referring to? Like an end-to-end
yes,
journey through
an end-to-end journey.
Yes,
right.
Well, because this is falls in the category of end-to-end testing, it is worth keeping the higher maintainability costs in place and still using these test cases in order to preserve the end-to-end part of the test case. Of course, there is a bit of a problem because the single steps in the test case, they might refer to different parts in the requirements, and this might make it more difficult to maintain your test case. But with a good tooling set, you get notification automatically that if there is a change in one part, that this will reflect step 3750 in test case 50,721.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that explanation.
Thanks very much for your question, Kartik.
If you're not convinced, you can argue back. Feel free.
No, I'm convinced. I'm convinced about the explanation, but I'm still thinking: is it worth putting that efforts into linking all the requirement documents for those more than 30 steps for an end-to-end journey test case, or is there another way that we can be more helpful, or is there another way that we can split the test cases and
well, if you split it, you don't have the full chain, so it's kind of you make an interruption. If you leave away the link between the requirements and the specific steps in the test cases, you might not get any indication of if there is a change that might influence the test case, and so the test case needs to be overhauled. If you don't do the link, it's kind of you don't get that notification for that specific test case, and then the test case suddenly becomes wrong. So I would avoid that.
Okay. Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else want to challenge Ilari in the perspective that he doesn't hold, that he's trying to make the best case for? Like, why on earth would he think that? If there's no others, then I'll ask one. In the world of test cases, what do you do with emerging requirements? It seems to be predicated, kind of a whole case seems to be predicated on the idea that you can know in advance all the things that you want to do. And my experience is quite different to that.
Well, that's actually quite an easy question to answer. So basically you start with a set that you have at the very beginning. If there's some emerging set, you add to the test case repository on the spot. So in a good software testing project, you should always reserve a little bit of time for the unknown unknowns. I mean, it's especially, I think there's this community called the context-driven testers, something like that. And they often are very hostile towards test cases, and they think because things are changing, you can react to that. But basically, you acknowledge that these things are happening, and then on the spot, you will actually add a test case when there's an emerging property. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I guess you're quite kind of big on traceability. In fact, I see Fiona's just kind of talking about that as well. Fiona, do you want to do you want to ask yours?
Yeah. There are many cases, of course, where not all requirements are captured. So are you saying that every test case must be attached to a requirement, otherwise you can't test?
Well, say it again.
Are you saying that every test case, that you must have a test case for every requirement? Fine. But are you saying that you can't, in fact, have a test case where you don't have an explicit written requirement?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that any explicit requirement that's available somewhere needs to have a counterpart in test case. That doesn't preclude having test cases that are not linked to something. Let's say there is some usability aspects that need to be done that are not defined in any specification. So I wouldn't argue for not having test cases outside of the linking system to requirements and specifications.
Okay, because I have seen, in fact, I have actually worked with clients who took that position.
Yes, that would be too rigid.
Right. Thank you.
Anybody else? Is there anybody not in favor of test cases? I'll go another then. Ilari, you talked about test cases being a good way to manage coverage or to understand coverage. But again, I kind of say it's coverage of the things that you've thought of, as opposed to necessarily areas of the product or risks. I didn't hear you talk about risk once in your talk, but that's a kind of really significant thing that you should be considering when testing, in my view.
Well, since there is a clear link between any test case and whatever there is written in requirements, actually all the risks are covered almost automatically by doing that. Now, again, if you identify a risk outside of what has already been covered by test cases, that's when the case comes into a place where Fiona asked about then adding another test case that covers that specific thing that has been identified later on. Usually in my project, there are the risk managers that that handle the risk assessment in the project, and they usually flag us if there is any action needed on the test case creation side.
I can't raise my hand. I don't seem to have that ability, so I'm gonna jump in here if I may.
Sure.
If there isn't somebody else in the queue. When you talk about test cases, you're talking about prose test cases in words?
Yes.
Interesting.
So,
so yes, I will argue with that.
So yes, I talk about especially the central element that the steps need to be numbered and need to be explicit in plain language. Now again, that doesn't preclude any adding of graphical elements in my test case. So, but they shouldn't be central. They should be kind of side artifacts within the artifact of a test case. But basically, the flow of the test that you're executing should be in plain English language.
Right. Okay. I have actually argued in favor of test cases in a couple of instances, but not universal test cases. I've argued in favor of test cases where we were fundamentally doing exploratory testing, but where we had high-risk features that required complicated numerical inputs with very precise expected numerical results. And in that case, what I argued for was test cases that were essentially created in spreadsheets where we calculated the expected results.
Yes, now since in this,
at all.
Yeah, now since in this high risk areas, if there is an argument for having test cases there, that makes them universal into all aspects of testing. Now also keep in mind that the checklists that pilots use before they start an airplane, they're very explicit. They're also numbered. They're very similar to test cases. So what is good for pilots is good for testers.
Right.
Yeah, Karthik,
Yes.
looks like you want to come back in.
Yeah. I have another question. So how do you determine the level of details a test case should have? So for instance, we have a UI form or a UX form where there are some color changes happening. There are some CSS effects happening. But the end result is to submit the form and to see whether the data has been captured in the database. Just a small example. So do we actually go and write the test case in a level such as the user is clicking a checkbox and verifying whether the checkbox has turned green, or whether the validation error has a red color, and so on. So, so there is always a level of details that is to be maintained in a test case. So how do you determine that level of detail?
So in an ideal case, every observable action becomes a single step in a test case and is numbered. So anything that is distinctly observed as an action should be one step in the test case. That would be the ideal case. Now, let's say you have a very experienced team that has been working on the same product. Then gradually over time, you can probably leave away the more obvious steps. So you probably wouldn't mention the adding the specific button because people are aware of that. So that depends on the seniority of the team.
Okay. So so counter question. So does that mean that so as the product ages, does that mean that we need to modify the test cases to include less details and to make it more comprehensive?
Well, not necessarily, because there is attrition in companies. So it is hard work to execute the test cases. So there will be a natural attrition in companies, and more junior testers will join, which will quite naturally reduce the necessity to remove details.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Karthik. We're just at the 10 minutes, so I'll ask the one more question from Rita that's in the chat, and then we'll move on. In your experience, at what point in the development life cycle should the test cases be written?
As soon as the requirements and specifications are signed off in the project, that's the starting signal to start writing test cases.
Okay, and yeah, okay, we'll just go for Paul's question as well. Do the test cases have to be more detailed than the story?
The story is not detailed at all. So I'm not sure I understand your question correctly.
Paul, would you care to elaborate? Paul? No. Okay, then we'll move on. Thank you for that, Ilari. You managed to hold it together almost entirely through the questions. Could you reflect on your experience, please? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so Paul's come back. Story equals requirements. So do the test cases have to be more detailed than the requirements?
Well, yes and no. So of course, the test cases need to describe steps of how you're going to test something. And there might be variation in the way you approach testing a specific element of the requirement. So there might be more details in one area and less details in others. That depends on what part of the test case you're looking at.
Okay, thank you. And let's go for your reflection on the experience of trying to justify test cases.
Where should I start? So in general, I have found that it's some of the positions in the testing community, and especially the community like the ASD, are held in a very religious way. So there is there is quite a fundamentalist mindset somewhere. And I often find myself in that fundamentalist mindset as well, that there are no best practices, all this kind of this fiery arguing against things. So that's why I found the exercise of going through a steel manning exercise really, really interesting, because I really try to find one of the positions that I fiercely don't like that there needs to be this step-by-step test case. This is something that makes me angry inside, that there are still many, especially consulting companies, running around and advertising for these, you really need to write the fine granular steps every single time. It doesn't matter what kind of context you find yourself in. And then I tried to shove that on the side and really try to find some good arguments. And I think I found 6 valid ones. And the last one, of course, is a bit ridiculing the whole thing, because that's a study that doesn't exist. And it's kind of, so the book that I held up, this is actually McCracken, Digital Computer Programming, which is the book with the first chapter on testing. It's 1957. So this was kind of my protector in this exercise going through steel manning. But there are, of course, these obscure studies somewhere that this is the best way to handle it. And there are often these certification touting organizations that bring up these papers from 1964 that some obscure person has written, and you will find a paper on any single position you want to take. Whatever position you want to take, you will find some academic paper supporting your position. Now, the step-by-step test case part, in some areas, it might actually be very important. And I think, Fiona, you brought that up, that there are some, where there's exact calculations. So it's not always a bad thing. And I find that in the, especially in the context-driven communities, so test cases are bad. It's kind of, and you can then completely discard it, and you don't have to think, is there actually a case where that statement is not true? And I think in some cases there needs to be a very explicit document, especially in areas where lives are at risk. So highly regulated areas for, let's say, any medical devices that could kill people. It might make sense to have more explicit test protocols that you have to follow very strictly, and they don't exclude doing experimentation in the product neither. So I think that you can't put yourself into the position that, okay, test case, they are a priori bad and should be discarded in any cases. However, it's kind of in my day job as the general manager of House of Test, we are very often confronted with organizations that believe that every single thing needs to be handled as a step-by-step test case. And we have found it very hard to move them away from, okay, so yes, maybe there are some areas where it makes sense, but in others it doesn't make sense. So that's on test case. I think one can take a little bit of a nuanced position on test cases, and I think there are the test cases are best practice and you need to do it versus test cases they're always bad. You should never do them. Which is more at home at the context-driven committee that, these test cases, that's a bad thing. So I think these extreme positions should maybe meet somewhere in the middle. That would be a very nice thing. Now, in terms of the feeling during this exercise, so because first of all, I started with it was just an authority argument. So because it's kind of, I describe myself as boss, manager, consultant. So these are like these are the 3 really negatively connotated thing. Boss, that's a bossy guy, and the managers are bad anyway, and the consultants, these are all idiots. So it's kind of, I try to put myself in the position that I have a gray beard, I know what I talk about. So that is often an argument that is brought. Then in terms of my arguments themselves, like test cases are explicit, yes, they are of course controllable and they have a link, but that doesn't mean that they in any way describe the full spectrum of what there is in testing. And so a requirements document is a subset of all the requirements. So it's the requirements document is not all the entirety of requirements. Of course, that doesn't help. Then the monitor progress, that is so difficult that it's going to take this numerical quantitative number, and then you try to attach it to some qualitative statement. So that's a transposition of systems that doesn't work neither. Then maintainability costs. So it's kind of, I came up with that because I can argue for it, but that's absolutely not true. It's usually the more explicit and formal documents you have, the more you end up in maintenance hell, in my experience. Then the junior testers, so that yes, you could argue for that, but usually it's better to have them pair up with a more senior person, and I found that to be the fast track into testing. And then high coverage, yes, I mean coverage. You're never covering software; you're covering a model of the software. So that's usually the coverage argument for those people can be discarded by asking, okay, according to what? Okay, what model of the software are you referring to? And if it's just a number of words in your requirements document, then yes. So in a way, I'm happy this is over because I felt myself getting some hot ears at times. Especially, I found the questions very difficult to answer and try to be genuine in my argument. And it's kind of my personal tendencies is often to ridicule things. It's my survival mechanism, and so that was specifically difficult to not do that here. I don't think I've completely achieved that, but anyway, as an experience, this was I've rarely felt so nervous before talking. Although I'm talking to my screen, but I felt really nervous. So that's that.
Thank you very much for that. Just one question on the end of it. Do you feel like you altered a perspective anywhere as a result of this, or maybe during the process of it? You were kind of talking about context-driven testing community, maybe always a kind of totally anti-test case, and maybe you were there and you've loosened up a little, or not?
I think so it's kind of my natural disposition is to hold very strong opinions and strong positions and defend them fiercely and kind of falling into us versus them mentality. And sometimes it's good to just walk in the shoes of the other party. But then again, it's very difficult to say because all these things, they come from a very strong part of people that influence testing. So the step-by-step test case, there are so many consulting companies that tout that idea that I find it very difficult to acknowledge the validity of what they're selling. Although I find that there's cases where step-by-step makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. That was great fun. Fiona, it's your turn next. If you'd like to share your screen, and please take it away.
Okay, let me just bring up slides. And I will play. Okay. So this is the argument and the position that I'm taking. Oh, I didn't do a biography slide. I find that's something I often forget to do. I will say at the beginning that like the graybeard who spoke before me, I'm a gray-haired person, and I've been in the field of software development since 1978. So I've seen a great deal. I have acquired, of course, in the natural course of that, I've acquired a great deal of knowledge and a great deal of wisdom that you would do well to pay attention to. So I'm going to argue that having a reporting structure for testers, which is separate from the engineering stream, is really the only way to ensure that testing concerns and software quality are given due consideration. Now, what do I mean by an independent test team? Well, first, that it's a team that is headed by someone who is, in fact, a specialist test manager, is a knowledgeable person in the field of testing. That the team consists of people who are specialist testers, and that the team has a separate reporting structure, that it's a parallel reporting line, parallel to the engineering organization, up to executive management, and that it is independent of the engineering organization. So this is something that a potential client said to me once. My testers currently report to the development manager. I'm thinking about moving them into a separate reporting stream with their own manager. That way they'll have more clout and the project managers will have to listen to their concerns. And I think that this is quite common. It's a very important point about testing and where testing fits in organizations. So first, the importance of having a voice at the management table. So long as you have a testing organization which is managed by a specialist tester, then you are ensuring that someone with the testing knowledge and experience has a voice to be heard by senior management. And that is a person who is able to do advocacy for testing, advocacy for quality, and of course, the budget to ensure that those concerns are carried out. This person and this organization is in a good position to give testers access that is needed for them to take on project activities, to get into projects as early as they need to be there, so that they're potentially present and participating during things like the development of stories and the refinement of stories, or refinement of requirements, depending on how those things are captured in your organization. And of course, that they are in a position to work with and to take on risk management in projects. Ensuring that we have integrity of our tests. Our testers are not, because they are in a specialist organization, because they are backed up by a specialist manager, they don't have a builder bias. They're able to approach software with an independent view. And again, because we have knowledgeable people, we have people who are out there keeping track of what's happening in the testing community, what's happening in terms of development of test methods, keeping up with those things, bringing them into the community of practice that is this independent test team. And of course, sharing a quality culture and promoting that quality culture throughout the organization, and maintaining a stakeholder focus, ensuring that the business needs are being met and not being overridden by engineering needs like getting stuff out the door fast, getting product out the door fast. It makes it possible for testers to have that independence on projects, to ensure that their concerns are heard and that their concerns are not overridden by product owners or engineering managers whose concerns are other than quality, whose concerns are other than getting the bugs fixed. And of course, also perhaps ensuring that the testers are not co-opted, that they maintain their sense of separation from that builder mentality and from those builders. It's also extremely important for growing testers to have an organization that is dedicated to testers, so that the right people are hired, so that there is training available for testers that is provided by a knowledgeable test manager, a specialist test manager, who can perhaps do that training, but also source good training and bringing it into the organization. And tailoring assignments, ensuring that someone who needs to move to the next step or who needs to learn a different kind of testing, have experience of a different kind of testing, is assigned to the right projects to help people grow and to keep nurturing their careers. And of course, coaching and mentoring those testers. So that was really my case. I'm not sure whether I even managed to speak for 10 minutes on it, but those were all very heartfelt points that I think were very important in how testing fits into an organization.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. There's no penalty for not speaking for your time, so that's all right. Would anyone like to ask a question or maybe tell Fiona that she's wrong and why? Please put your hand up, and if you're prepared to come on screen and talk, that would be great. Janet. If you don't want to ask your question in chat, I'll ask it on your behalf as well. But Janet, please go.
That's okay. So Fiona, what do you tell a team that when they no longer have that separate test team, that the testers are embedded in the team and they're working really closely with them, but they're still putting out a good quality product. How do you convince them that they should actually separate those testers back out?
Well, how do you know that they're really putting out a good quality product? I mean, the conditions are such that that's at risk at any time, because those testers could be, that embedded tester could be co-opted so easily. Could suddenly
co-opted.
Stop,
what do you mean co-opted?
Start thinking like a builder rather than like a tester.
Oh, yes. I've heard that one before too. I've heard that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Ilari.
So if I understand your argument correctly, you very much argue towards building a structure and making limitations and kind of working on the structural setup of teams. So how would you value that against fostering a very active communication culture within teams, instead of kind of, building up these barriers and kind of, strictly separating teams versus talking to each other and having an honest feedback culture and a storytelling culture where people start to understand each other's roles? It appears to me that your argument is very rigid in the sense of kind of, really shielding those teams away from that.
Well, I think it's important, of course, that people work together. And to go back to what Janet was talking about, having testers embedded on teams, I think that can work perfectly well, so long as they have an organizational structure to come back to. It is, of course, I think, the role of a test manager to build bridges with other organizations. And undoubtedly, as people are working embedded in teams, they are going to be talking with the people they are working with and sharing experiences and collaborating. But their line management, I believe, needs to be about being in a separate organization, because that's where they will get management that is knowledgeable about testing.
Are you happy with that, Ilari?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Well, while you're thinking of one, maybe I will ask: how do you prevent politics and mixed incentives across the organisation getting in the way of this kind of thing, where the test manager's been incentivized to do one thing, keep a lid on costs and do as little testing as possible, and development management wants the developers to maybe do as little testing as possible and get the testers to do it all because we've got a test team, and so they're kind of incentivized in two different ways, and politics starts to get in the way.
It's not clear to me how you manage that in any organization. I mean, you're always going to have conflicts, and you're always going to have different incentives. If your reward structure is such that different people performing different roles, but who are nevertheless working together on the same products, are in fact rewarded for two different things, then you're going to have conflicts. And I don't know how you get around that other than adjusting your reward structure.
Okay, thank you. Urja.
Thank you. It's Iria, I have to say.
I'm sorry about that.
No, but it's really easy mistake. So anyhow, Fiona, let me ask you something. You mentioned that test managers should build those relationship bridges. But would you like to share or expand a little bit how they should work on those relationships instead of, I don't know, testers, if I understood you correctly?
Well, I'm not suggesting that testers should not also work on relationships. I think that's the job of testers and test managers. But if the test manager has a seat at the management table, that person is in an ideal position to find allies, to create relationships, to nurture relationships with people in other organizational structures.
Okay, But what if what if you have like too many bridges?
Can you explain what you mean by that?
I mean, too many people to attend to. How would you prioritize important relationships?
Well, I talked about looking for allies, right? I mean, the important relationships to me are the ones that allow you to get the job done. So, of course, you look for the people who are in a position to help you get the job done. People who are of the right mindset, perhaps, to want you to get the job done. I mean, often, for example, architects are very much in favor of testing and of helping testing, and so there are different. It's different in every organization, of course. It's a context thing.
Okay. May I ask one more before? I saw somebody is also asking on the chat something. Okay, may I ask one
go
more?
for it. Yeah.
Thank you. What about in this kind of a setup? What about the collaboration and this like engagement between those separate testers and the teams they're working with?
They're free to interact and to work with on the teams, but they have a structure to come back to. They have a home to come back to, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. You did well.
Thank you, Iria. Marit's got a question, Fiona. Why does a seat at the management table guarantee that the message is better heard?
Doesn't guarantee it, of course, but it can enable it better than not being heard at all by senior management, not having the opportunity. At least you're up there for consideration. Whereas if you're not even at the table, then how can you?
Well, I guess you might get it being fed up through the structure that you dislike, through the development management structure. That could report on, let's assume it's a test case shop. You could report on the test coverage into management meeting.
You could, but do they really understand it?
No. Anybody else got questions for Fiona? Again, or just a different perspective that I'd like to put to challenge the case she's trying to make here? Okay, I'll ask one. You've listed quite a few benefits, and I think you're making a good case for them. Can you see another way to get the same kind of benefits that you would also see merit in?
Depends on the organization, I would suggest, and on the size of the organization and on the size of the projects they do. There are always benefits in just about any strategy that companies employ, but this is one way to ensure that you get all of those benefits.
And sure. So maybe could you give us a scenario where you wouldn't advocate this, or where there's sufficient benefit that you would seriously consider not? Are you still there, Fiona?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I was just asking, you said there might be, it's contextual, and maybe there's places where you can get the benefits other way. What kind of scenario would you kind of go against this advice? Is there one that you can summarize for us?
It's a very small organization. I think excess structure is perhaps not ideally adapted to a small organization.
Okay, thank you. Last chance for anyone who wants to ask a question, and I'm going to ask Fiona to reflect. Okay. Oh, looks like, oh no, not a question. Okay, then Fiona, please, thank you very much for that. Could you reflect on the experience for us?
It's not quite diametrically opposed to what I really believe, but close. But because I've been in the industry for as long as I have of course seen the complete spectrum, just about. When I started, testers, and there were specialist testers even then, testers, but we were embedded in teams. There was no question of separation. But it was true then, and I'm talking about, say, the early 80s, that we did have issues where development managers didn't listen to testers and didn't listen to the results of testing, and would, actually something I didn't talk about here was not even having your concerns overridden, but having bugs minimized. Oh, that's not really that serious because, and that sort of thing did happen. So at the time, I was very much an advocate of having a separate structure in a sufficiently large organization, as I think most of us were. And I'm not sure that it wasn't, I think that it probably was a necessary step in evolution, in the evolution of testing and in the evolution of how we do software projects. But I think that it had some very bad outcomes. One of them being that testers, in my experience, became very self-righteous and saw themselves as gatekeepers and saw themselves as the only arbiters of quality, the only people who actually cared about software quality. And that was horrible. That just was dysfunctional. So I very much like the idea of us coming back to our roots, if you like, where people with different skills, potentially different roles, work together. And certainly, when I began, everybody tested. The programmers tested. I learned to test from the programmers and then became the tester, but they still carried on testing. So I think we're now in a much healthier, position where everybody, quality is everybody's responsibility, and everybody works toward that end. Not that I'm convinced that always happens, but it's aspirational, and I think rightly so. I found that the exercise really interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because I have been through that evolution, if you like. Two, because I had completely forgotten that 10 years ago, I wrote an article for Sticky Minds, which I began with the quotation I gave from a potential customer, in which I argued quite strongly against having separated test teams. But in going through this, I've reused slides a little bit, changed some of the content of them, but I reused slides, a couple of them at least, from a keynote that I did at Anna Roisman's Test Leadership Congress, which I titled the Dying Art of Test Management. And it reminded me that there are some areas where I think the current organization of projects and the current embedding of testers doesn't always work best to the tester's benefit, or in fact to the development of good software. And it kind of reminded me of that. One case is, I think, or one area is in the care and feeding of testers, where I think because testers are now fully embedded on teams, but those teams are doing professional software development and having to move quickly. There isn't really any room for very junior people on a lot of teams and in a lot of companies. And I think that it's quite, I've seen a lot of difficulty for people trying to become testers, or for junior testers trying to get jobs. And I think that there may be organizations where it's just not possible really to bring in junior people and then nurture them and help them grow into becoming senior testers, that there isn't much room in the industry for junior testers. And I think that's a not good thing for software development overall. I also think that there is some potential, I guess, for an embedded tester to feel in the minority and to feel pressured not to maintain what I think of as an independence of mind, but in fact to be sort of swept along with the desire to get everything out fast. That's a problem.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you the same question that I asked Ilari. Did you find that your mind was changed or your position shifted slightly on anything as a result of this?
Not really. I did notice one thing, that although I made that really strong statement that, you know, to do professional software development, it's essential, and actually make those points. I didn't use the word professional. I didn't define what I meant by professional. And I didn't really say it was essential. Which I thought was an interesting reflection, if you like, on critical thinking. How we use words in making our arguments. I did a useful exercise, and I think it's an important exercise to take if you are someone who is committed to critical thinking. I think it's very important to take the time out sometimes to think of all, as Ilari said, walk in someone else's shoes, to really try and understand the arguments that someone has for a position that is contrary to your own.
And that's a great sentiment to end on. Thank you very much to Fiona and Ilari for both the great way that they've stuck to their guns on their cases tonight, but also for the effort that it took to prepare for this. I really appreciate that. Ilari, yes.
Yes, maybe one last thing in terms of junior testers getting a hold in the industry and everything. So one of the things I highly recommend for especially junior testers is buy a ticket for the CAST conference. This is not because I'm very strongly tied to the ASD, but in general, I know from my own professional development and experience, and also from many of my friends who are quite famous speakers at conferences, who have gotten very good positions in companies. Most of them can tie their steepness in rising in their career exactly to the moment when they came to CAST conferences and started to network with other people. So there is an additional value to coming to CAST besides just having good tracks, but it will actually there is a high chance that it will accelerate your professional development. So come to CAST. It's in sunny San Diego, California. So that's all I want to say.
Okay, thank you for that advert. And thank you again, Fiona and Ilari. I think this was an experiment for us. Personally, I enjoyed it a great deal, and I think it could be valuable. The attendees, thank you very much for coming and helping us make a success of it. If you have thoughts on how it went, if you'd like to see this kind of thing again, what you might change if we did it again, I'm very interested to hear those thoughts. So please, you can contact me through the ASD Slack, or I'm on Twitter, or if you want to stick around at the end of the call, I'll wait and you can tell me what needs to be changed. But that's the end. Thank you all for coming.